I have a bit of a rolling meditation, and hopefully it will come out somewhat presentable. What does the Shema Israel have to do with Romans 8:28? Romans 8:28 says, for we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purposes. So that's Romans 8:28. The Shema Israel is, hear, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. And the Jews usually substitute Yahweh with Adonai or with Hashem. But what do those two verses have to do together? And Romans 8:28, if you've ever sat through any sermon on that passage, hopefully the pastor explained that that verse is not your promise card to a better life. What that is an encouragement in the midst of difficulties, that God will work your difficulties together and your good things together for your good, both now and in eternity. But the Shema Israel says God is one. But given the fact that you cannot observe the oneness of God, in the sense of this, God has set up rulers over the universe, over the people of the nations. And in the Psalms, you see this passage where God says, do you indeed rule justly, O gods, Elohim, plural. He's speaking in the council of the gods, is what it says in one of the Psalms. And so in that one of those Psalms, he says to the Elohim, gods, plural, he says that you, even though you are gods, you will all die like men. And this is because they had not judged justly. Now, interestingly, I'm not someone that believes in a plurality of gods. I believe God appoints rulership to angels. Here's why I think they're angels. Because in Hebrews chapter 1 cites one of those psalm passages that talks about God's plural, and it translates that word as angelos, angel. Same passage, same context, but it translates the word as angelos. That makes me think these are not co-equal gods with Yahweh. These are angelic rulers to whom God has given some of his authority, maybe some of even his nature. That's not so crazy, since Peter says we share in the divine nature, those of us in the new covenant. So essentially, what you have is this. Here's where I'm going to connect those two dots of Romans 8:28 with the Shema Israel. Romans 8:28 is God's promise that he will work through a divided nature of God. Not that God himself is divided, but the rulers that he has appointed and given some of his authority to are divided against him. Psalm 2 says, why did the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. And then, of course, Yahweh gives a belly laugh in that psalm. And he says that I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. Basically, it's this. Romans 8 says that God is going to work through corrupt spiritual rulers. But you have to be patient and you have to persevere. These, quote, Elohim, who are really angels, they're created. They're not eternal. They're not divine in the sense that they are omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. But certainly they share in some of the attributes of God in order to judge the nations. And for the most part, according to the Psalm passage, they don't do that great. So God has to judge them, I guess, periodically, or maybe ultimately, one or the other. So here's where it would be an encouragement. Here's where this would be practical. Paul says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the, quote, rulers and authorities, the cosmic powers of this present darkness, the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And he also, somewhere else, cites spiritual wickedness in high places. So these are these judges that have something of God's authority and power, but they're not God himself. They're not uncreated. They're not eternal. They're not quite God. They're actually angels. And you will, as a person on the earth who is yet to be glorified, you will run into these rulers and their authority all the time. And they will make your life a living heck. And you will have to, by faith, trust that the Shema Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one, is true in the midst of things that look like justice is thwarted, like all things are going poorly. And so that's my meditation for the day. It came out better than I expected. We'll see how it looks on video, but the Shema Israel is something we acknowledge by faith. And Romans 8:28 is like that Shema Israel in practice. And I have to give my credit to actually a Jewish commentary, Orthodox Jewish commentary, on the Minor Prophets when it talks about Zechariah in chapter 14, because there's a promise there. It's a very strange promise, hard to understand. It says in this like end times kind of event, it says Yahweh will be one and his name one. And they actually take up this perspective of, even though we acknowledge by faith that Yahweh is one, we agree with God and his word that it's true, we don't always see it because we sometimes see corrupt judgments on the earth. And you just have to wait for God to work through whatever processes he has set up to work around those dark rulers, those dark authorities. I hope this is an encouragement to you if you're going through a hard time, that there may be some spiritual authority, even God-like, not quite God, but God-like, resisting your good, resisting the truth, resisting what's right for you. And it may be doing all kinds of nasty things. But take up the banner of faith, trust that God is beyond them, so far beyond them, and that he is able to turn all the hard and difficult things that are against you for your perfect good, even in this life. So anyway, that's my meditation. Have a great rest of your day.